Chapter 3. The Artful Dodger. It was 8 o'clock now. Though he was nearly 5 miles away from the town, he ran and hid behind the hedges, by turns, till noon, fearing that he might be pursued. Then he sat down to rest by the side of the milestone and began to think, for the first time, where he had better go and try and live. The stone by which he was seated read that it was just 70 miles from that spot to London. The name awakened a new train of ideas in the boy's mind. London! That great, large place! Nobody, not even Mr. Mumble, could ever find him there. As these things passed through his thoughts, he jumped upon his feet and again walked forward. After days and nights of endless walking, begging in villages and sleeping in the cold, Oliver arrived in London. Upon arriving, he met a young boy of his own age. He was a snub-nosed, flat-browed, common-faced boy enough, and as dirty a juvenile as one would wish to see. But he had about him all the airs and manners of a man. He was short of his age, with rather bow legs and a little sharp, ugly eyes. His hat was stuck on the top of his head so lightly that it threatened to fall off every moment. Would have done so, very often, if the wearer had not had a knack of every now and then giving his head a sudden twitch, which brought it back to its old place again. He wore a man's coat, which reached nearly to his heels. He had turned the cuffs back, halfway up his arm, to get his hands out of the sleeves, apparently with the ultimate view of thrusting them into the pockets of his corduroy trousers. For there he kept them. He was, altogether, as roistering and swaggering a young gentleman as ever stood 4 feet 6, or something less, in his bluchers. "Hello, my covey, what's the row?" said this strange young gentleman to Oliver. "I'm very hungry and tired," replied Oliver, the tears standing in his eyes as he spoke. "I've walked a long way. I've been walking these 7 days." "Walking for 7 days?" said the young gentleman. "Oh, I see. Come on, you want grub and you shall have it. Up with you on your pins there." The boy took Oliver to an inn and fed him handsomely. He offered him lodgings for the remainder of his stay in London, an offer that Oliver could not resist. He soon learned that his new friend was a young Mr. Jack Dawkins, and furthermore avowed that among his intimate friends he was better known by the Artful Dodger. Later, they arrived at the lodgings at Islington, a dirtier or more wretched place Oliver had never seen. The street was very narrow and muddy, and the air was impregnated with filthy odours. There were a good many small shops, but the only stock in trade appeared to be heaps of children, who, even at that time of night, were crawling in and out at the doors, or screaming from the inside. Oliver was just considering whether he hadn't better run away when they reached the bottom of the hill. His conductor, catching him by the arm, pushed open the door of a house near Field Lane, and, drawing him into the passage, closed it behind them. They entered the house and made their way upstairs. In the kitchen they found a very old, shriveled Jew, whose villainous-looking and repulsive face was obscured by a quantity of matted red hair. He was dressed in a greasy flannel gown, with his throat bare, and seemed to be dividing his attention between the frying-pan and a clothes horse, over which a great number of silk handkerchiefs were hanging. Several rough beds made of old sacks were huddled side by side on the floor. Seated round the table were 4 or 5 boys, none older than the Dodger, smoking long clay pipes, and drinking spirits with the air of middle-aged men. These all crowded about their associate as he whispered a few words to the Jew, and then turned round and grinned at Oliver. So did the Jew himself, toasting fork in hand. "This is him, Fagin," said Jack Dawkins. "My friend, Oliver Twist." "We are very glad to see you, Oliver, very," said the Jew. "Dodger, take off the sausages, and draw a tub near the fire for Oliver. Ah, you're a-staring at the pocket handkerchiefs. My dear, there are a good many of them, ain't there? We've just looked them out, ready for the wash. That's all, Oliver, that's all." Oliver ate his share, and the Jew then mixed him a glass of hot gin and water, telling him he must drink it off directly, because another gentleman wanted the tumbler. Oliver did as he was desired. Immediately afterwards he felt himself gently lifted onto one of the sacks, and then he sunk into a deep sleep.